All right. Thank you.
You're in the right spot.
Hey, Jennifer.
I want to call the Municipal Committee meeting for December 3rd to order. It's 9:08 p.m. And first, if we could do the roll call, please.
Yes, sir. Alderman Bill Van Buskert.
Present.
Alderman Derek Ward.
Here.
Alderman Janet Emerson.
Here.
Alderman Jim Azier.
Here.
And Alderman Greg Walters.
Here. We do have a quorum. And first item on the agenda is approval of the October 15th, 2019 minutes.
So moved. Second.
Okay, that's Alderman Walters and Alderman Azier. The second? Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Alderman Walters.
Yes.
Alderman Azier.
Yes.
Alderman Emerson. Yes. Alderman Bill Van Buskert.
Yes.
And Alderman Ward.
Yes. And we have a couple of discussion items this evening, and I just want to thank Mr. Nigro for joining us this evening, and I really appreciate that. It was requested that you be here, and I thank you for staying this late hour. And thank you, Miss Wilson, for being here, Mr. Adarapur, and our city attorney. Thank you for sticking around. I appreciate it. So the first discussion item, do you want to read that, Missy, or would you like for me to do that?
Consideration of proposed changes to the City Code, Chapter 6, Animal Control, Division 2, Restraint and Confinement for the purpose of limiting tethering. What you have in your board packet is Alderman Azier met with staff and proposed some changes to the current city code. We then sent that to both city legal counsel and to the city prosecutor, and what you have in your packet is what we staff received back from legal counsel for your consideration. And I will turn it over to you all for discussion there too.
Very good. Mr. Azier, do you have any comments for us relative to your suggested amendment?
I do, thank you. So what we had was what we thought was a tethering ordinance, and the wording was poor. And in my dialogue with the Coast Department, found that it really wasn't enforceable, or it wasn't clarified to be enforceable. And I think it shows us a need when we write our codes to be specific, because wording is not what we think it is when we write it or pass it. It's it's the wording that can be enforced in court, and I think that's why one of the reasons why we have Ross here tonight, because the importance of giving the prosecutor something viable that would stand up and be worth their time in court. So the question was whether or not we really want people to be allowed to tether dogs or not. And my, you have three choices. You cannot do it. You can allow them to tether all they want, or you can have something in between. And our problem is when you go to minutes, you can say, well, you can do it for 30 minutes, 90 minutes, half the day to sunset. It makes it almost impossible for a codes department to go out there and find out how they can't sit there and wait all day. And so I don't think the middle options either is very viable. Either we're going to allow people to tether them or not. And that was why when I met with staff, we came up with this proposal. One of the reasons why I found this agreeable, and I will tell you this, and I think I've walked the city at least 4 times running for office from border to border. So I've seen a lot of houses with, I really don't see that many dogs that are tethered outside. I've only really actually run into 2 of them. One of them actually bit me, was tethered to the front porch. So I think that most people who have outdoor dogs, have kennels for them or have a backyard. And and most of them that I know of actually have little doors that let the dogs go in and out. So I don't think this is something that you see a lot of in Raytown. I think most animal owners take good care of their pets. But the dog that we had in question was an outdoor dog that was being tethered sometimes all day long. And so that was the problem. I think it's really up to the board. I'm not recommending either one. I just say that we need to know exactly what the law is and we can enforce it. I did talk to Alderman Walters, and I was in agreement with him. On this proposal that we have in writing in front of you allows a dog to be tethered if the owner is visibly present outdoors. That's not even questionable. So, Greg, I'm going to go ahead and refer to you because I think the one that you have is one that would say basically we're not going to allow tethering at all. So I'll go ahead and let you present your side.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Sorry. What I'm going to suggest is actually along the same lines that Mr. Azier suggested. He says that we could allow somebody to tether somebody as long as the owner, keeper, or harbor of the animal is outside in the same vicinity as the animal and within visibility range. To my way of thinking, you can accomplish the same thing with a leash. With one that goes out of, like with my dog, when it's time for her to go in for the evening, or she's inside already, but goes out for the evening, she goes out on a leash in my household, and that's mainly because if she sees a squirrel, it's game on, and I'll never catch up with her. So that's when I'm getting ready to go to bed and so forth. So but the thing is, by saying that that you could simply change this to be keeper or harbor of animal to leash the animal outside, except when the owner, keeper, or harbor of the animal is outside in the same vicinity as the animal within visibility range. In other words, they could go out, and as long as the dog's on a leash and they got that leash in their hand, it's good. And it's the same as a tether, except my fear with the tethering is that you're going to have situations where somebody's supposed to have tethered a dog. Oh, we only went in the house for 5 minutes. Oh, is that all it was? We're not going to write you a ticket for that today, because I've seen a lot of tethering in Raytown, and I consider it to be cruel. I consider it to make animals mean, and I've seen some terrible situations where it has hurt animals a lot from them being tethered in weather that's too hot without water and stuff like that. And sometimes, particularly on the weekends, it's hard to get animal control to come out for that situation. I've gone up to doors and knocked on their doors and said, hey, your animal's going to die out here. We need to make this as enforceable and as possible. If someone needs to take their dog outside or needs to take their dog outside, if they want to hold on to the leash on one side of a door a doggy door that goes out so the dog can go to the bathroom and then come back in when it's done, that's fine with me. But I don't like the idea of staking something in the ground and manacling the animal to it. It's just bad news. And this would be a lot cleaner because it would take away the tethering problem entirely.
Now, are you just talking about a yard that is not fenced?
Well, if they're in the backyard, you probably wouldn't see it.
Why would you tether a dog when you have a fence in the backyard?
I'm just asking the question.
Yeah.
Because some yards are fenced, some are not fenced. And so,
And to my way of thinking, if they're tethered, it would be illegal. Whether or not it would be enforced, I doubt. Because, first of all, I don't know if anybody would see it.
and there are some instances where we do have fences in some front yards as well.
Very few.
Very few.
Yeah,
We
our
do have
code
some-
does not allow for it, so they're slowly, those that are left are
Well,
slowly
you're not gonna have
disappearing.
new ones probably, but there are some that are there. So how would that work in a situation like that?
If they go out in the yard, they have to be on a leash according to the ordinance.
Even if it's a
That's what I'm
fenced yard?
suggesting.
And we have a leash law already.
Now, if it's a fenced yard,
I didn't
People
say-
allow their dogs out into their fenced yard all the time.
I didn't suggest that. I'm just saying as a practical extension of what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I want to jump in here because I think you're a little confused.
Okay.
because People have kennels.
Yeah.
Well,
But,
I think the tethering one applies if you have a fence. There you go. Are you trying to, I'm confused there. I thought we were just talking about tethering out there. So whether they have a fence or not shouldn't matter. It's just whether they're
Exactly.
tethered.
Right.
Okay, so
Right.
whether it's a fence or not in the yard, it wouldn't matter. It's either no tethering or tethering with somebody nearby in vicinity and observing. Is that the
That's
issue we're dealing
correct.
with? Okay.
Yeah, I was.
Because
trying-
kennels are the same way. No one would ever tether a dog when they're inside of a kennel, so.
and the other thing, of course, is that if it is in a front yard that's not fenced or in an unfenced yard, then we do have a leash law, and the dog would already have to be on a leash according to our current codes. Is that correct?
Correct. Otherwise, it'd be at large, yes.
Yes. Mr. Ward, go ahead.
So I share a lot of the concerns, and I guess in my mind, there's two different situations for tethering. We have some very good friends that have a standard poodle that's incredibly spoiled, sleeps on the bed every night, but they live on a large tract of land and they don't have it fenced. So when they put the dog out, they put it out on a tether. The dog does its business, and 3 minutes later, it's inside. And to me, while that's tethering, that's not problematic tethering. On the other hand, I think what a lot of us are really concerned about is when we see these people, they tether the dogs all day and it's 100 degrees and the dog can't get fresh water and the dog's neck's rubbed raw, and I think that offends all of us. And so I guess my question to city staff is would a 5-minute timeline, would that be overly burdensome, or would that be something that they could sit there, start filling out the paperwork, and by the time 5 minutes elapse, know whether or not we've had a violation?
No, it's not. We don't consider that a violation. I mean,
No, if we were to change the ordinance to say that beyond 5 minutes is a violation, less than 5 minutes was not a violation, would that be a burdensome time limit for city staff to?
Oh, sure. I mean, like,
That
so
would be
whether it's
burdensome.
5 minutes, whether it's 30 minutes or an hour, then you have to keep track of that continuously. Let's say 5 minutes, okay, they go back inside. Then we get a complaint 2 hours later, the dog is tethered again outside. That's another 5 minutes. And
Well,
how
I
many
understand. I
times-
mean, if you get there and it's not there, then there's no violation because it's already been taken in. But if somebody calls and says, hey, this house always has this dog tethered all day long, I mean, it seems like a 5-minute limit would not be overly burdensome because as they start filling out the violation paperwork, the 5 minutes is going to be up and they stick it on the door.
Well, the comment of all day long, we hear that comment quite a bit, but we could not approve it until we go by continuously all day and we see the dog is all day.
Yeah, and I get that.
But
And
that's-
30 minutes is a long time for you to sit there to wait
Yeah.
to see it. And that's why I'm
Sure.
saying is 5 minutes. Would that be a workable compromise?
Sure, I mean, 5 minutes, we can work around that, but again, and let me be clear as far as trying to amend this language. This is one of those languages, it's going to be a nightmare for code enforcement, regardless, whether you tether the dog, whether you take the tethering out, whether you put it on a leash, there isn't always a situation for code enforcement, whether it's 5 minutes, or whether you take the tethering out, or we have somebody visible from inside or outside. That's a nightmare code enforcement situation from my past experience.
So 5 minutes and not visible, I mean, why is that a nightmare? I mean, if you
Again,
don't see the
it's-
owner within 5 minutes, it's a violation.
Then you come back half an hour later, that's another 5 minutes, and then you go, what's the limit? Where do you draw the line?
5 minutes.
So after 5 minutes,
You write the ticket.
write a ticket. Is that a situation that we can prosecute for 5 minutes of the animals being outside?
If that's the ordinance, we can prosecute for that, yes.
I guess the question is that enforceable? And, you know, is it
Tethering, that's-
practical?
Well, I don't know if it's practical or not, but it definitely would be, you could charge it and it's enforceable, yes. Now, whether it's practical or not, that's not my decision to make, but it's enforceable.
Okay. Do we have, Mr. Nigro, do we have instances now where the current ordinances are enforced relative to tethering? Have we had
Do we charge
anyone
this?
fined? Have they been charged? And
Tethering charges that we prosecuted, yes. And a lot of times with the tethering, especially the circumstances Mr. Walters referred to where they're outside tethered all day, we also do a cruelty charge in addition because they got to have food and water if they're tethered out there. So we do have some charges where they're multiple times if they're in that situation.
And I have seen instances where there have been dogs tethered to a tree in a yard for long periods of time, and it's unfortunate. And I think, as someone said earlier, it's cruel to the animal, and sometimes it's done just as a security thing. I think people use those tethered dogs for security, and that's unfortunate, but I think that's happening more and more. So we want to do something that is practical, something that's enforceable, and that just makes good common sense, I think, and where it's not going to be cruelty to the animal, and you're not going to put other people in jeopardy. We do have the leash law, and that's still going to be enforced, and that is intact. And so I think the biggest question is where we're going to go with the tethering thing. Mr. Azier, you had a comment.
I think, without getting into a long explanation, laws generally are forced by the rule of reason. And that means, for example, like, let's go, if you were to say, well, you can tether for 5 minutes. Well, if a dog was tethered for 5 minutes and the next door neighbor didn't know how long it was going to be there, they'd have to call the codes. The codes would have to be out there. Well, the dog will be back in 5 minutes. So in reality, by the time the codes got there, they would say, well, there's no dog here. And so they wouldn't get a ticket, would they, Ray?
No, if we
Yeah,
can confirm the violation, no.
Right. So I don't think you need to put the 5 minutes in, because in reality, they're going to have 5 minutes anyway. People who especially have house dogs, sometimes when they're elderly, might tether their dog for 5 minutes and bring them back in. That's a rule of reason, and I think generally speaking, when all laws are enforced, 99.9% of the times, the authorities apply the rule of reason. If a police officer saw a car parked illegally and he stopped to confront the guy and saw they were delivering a baby, he would probably put away his ticket and wouldn't give him a ticket for it, because the rule of reason is, well, I was delivering a baby. Well, there's a sign that says you can't park there. I mean, that's the way we do things. I think every code that we have, I've seen from the code department, and Ray, have I not been in your office probably, I don't know, pretty often, haven't I? And there's a lot of times I come in with a problem, and almost every time Ray gives me a logical reason. And what I'm saying here is that I see our codes department being very, very, I don't want to use the word liberal, but very fair. Very fair, and they apply the rule of reason often. So I think if you have the no tethering, I think it's going to work. I don't think anybody is going to ever get a ticket for tethering for 5 minutes. That's my conclusion. So I do think people need to tether occasionally, especially maybe an elderly person. But a 5 minute thing is not what we're talking about. We're talking about the person leaves them out there all day long.
Well, the situation here with the amendment that's offered is saying that the outside in the same vicinity as the animal. So the keeper or harbor of the animal is outside in the same vicinity as the animal and within visibility range. So they can see the dog, you can see them. and without any specific time limit, but most people aren't going to, if they're tethering their dog, they're probably not going to stay out in the yard with it for hours. I don't imagine. But Ms. Emerson?
I have a problem with it because there are some large dogs that have shelter, they have water, they're well kept for, but they're tethered so that they don't run away. And I think saying the person has to be out there with them all the time, I can't agree with that.
I'm sorry, sir, I'm sorry, there's no public comment allowed this evening. That's okay. Sorry about that.
Mr. Chairman.
Hire somebody so he can walk my dog instead of taking her
Sir,
and go outside.
we're not allowing public comment this evening in this meeting. I apologize, but
I'm leaving.
you don't have to leave, sir. You're welcome to stay.
Why? You're telling me I can't let my dog go out
Sir,
in the backyard?
we're not allowing public comment this evening, sir. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
I just had a question for Ray.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Ward.
So the question for staff would be is, I think we're all struggling to come up with the right language, although I think there's general consensus up here as to what we want to see. Does staff have a recommendation, or does the prosecutor have a recommendation in terms of what would be some good language?
To be honest with you, I don't have a good, or staff don't have a good recommendation as far as the tethering goes. Now, the language has been submitted to, it's better, but then I give you an example, okay? You asking a pet owner to be outside with the pet. Here's a good example where we have a senior citizen that we're going to ask the senior citizen to stand outside. If he's wanted the dog to be outside for 3, 4, 5 hours, then we're going to ask that individual to be outside for that time frame. So the language is better, but I think still we're going to have a lot of challenges to enforce that. But like I said earlier, it's one of those languages is going to be a nightmare for code enforcement to enforce,
Mr. Chairman.
regardless which way you go.
No, I'm not going to go there. Okay. Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Walters.
Thank you. I'll tell you what, to help clarify things, I think we ought to try it. I don't think we have a motion out there yet.
We don't.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to make this unlawful for an owner, keeper, or harborer of animal to tether an animal in the city of Raytown. I think that Mr. Azure made a very good point about code enforcement officers using reason. And I don't think that this is meant to be something we're going to go out and abuse people with it. But I think we do have a problem that we need to address. And we had a woman up here who spoke of the last, not this council meeting, the last council meeting, where she and her 90-year-old husband were attacked by some dogs that they barely got back in their house in time. Now, that has very little to do with tethering, but the point is, it's a concern when animals get to the point where they feel like they have to attack something, and I think that's what tethering does. That would make it very clear that if somebody is tethering, we can go up to them and say, this is against the law, don't do it. And if they continue to do it, then go ahead and give them a ticket. But I don't think anybody's going to drive by, and I don't think some neighbor's going to be watching from across the street going, hey, he's got him out there, let's go call the animal control right away. I don't think it's going to happen that quickly. Normally it's something that's a bad situation. At least let's give it a try. If it fails, I'll be the first one to vote to go the other way when we come back to amendment.
I want to add something.
Was that a motion?
That's my motion.
And I'll second it.
Thank you.
Is to not allow tethering at all. That's the motion?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Mr. Azure.
This is what bothers me, and I'm going to say this politely, because I'd like to say about the codes department, but I don't want to mean it that way. But when you tell me, no matter how you word it, we can't enforce it, then I'm saying, let them do anything. Give them free range. I mean, if we're going to have codes, we have to have something. Why do we have code enforcement officers if we have codes, if we can't enforce them? So that's what I'm saying. I think we probably have a lot of codes out there that are unenforceable. And this is just one code where we're starting that we can start with. I don't want to ever hear from a code enforcement officer or from the head of the department saying, well, it's not really worded that we really can't do that. Then I'd say we need to do our job up here on the diet to make sure it's a real law. And if we can't do that, we should just get rid of the code department. I really mean that. You know, why have laws for the sake of having laws? That's crazy. I don't believe in it. They got to be good laws. They got to be workable. And yes, we have to be able to apply the rule of reason. That's all I'm saying.
Can I make a comment? I don't think I said that's not enforceable. What I said is going to be a nightmare, just like the situation we are in right now. We have a code in place that says tethering and to be visible from inside or outside. So what does that mean? That means that somebody have to be home to monitor the pet. But from the past experience and the language and the comment we've been hearing, that some individual, they're saying somebody have to be seeing their home with the pet. Now we have a situation, in the same case we're working on right now on Woodson Road. The individual is monitoring the dog with one of those Ring cameras. So is that allowed or is that not allowed? He's visibly monitoring the dog from inside.
Just a minute. We're getting way off base here, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Just
What
a
we're
moment.
saying here, it's,
Go ahead, Mr.
We have a
Hadarpour.
motion.
Mr. Hadarpour, go ahead. There was not a second to the motion.
Yes,
I
there
don't
is.
believe.
Yeah.
There is
I
a
did.
second? Okay.
I
well,
don't
again,
mind
the only comment
comments.
I made, I never said that is not enforceable. What I said is going to be, we're going to have a lot of challenges enforcing that.
I
That don't mean
disagree.
that's unenforceable. You can find a lot of code languages is vague, and it's based on the code enforcement's discretion, whether it's building inspection or code enforcement.
Earlier this evening, we had a discussion with landlords here about this, and I heard somebody from city staff tell me that it'll be up to the code enforcement officer to determine whether or not to go in and re-inspect. It would be up to them whether or not they would be going in there to charge an extra fee. Now, I'm sure there's going to be a list of fees, but what Mr. Asia was talking about, the reason and being common sense decisions on situations like that, I can understand, just like we do with the police that doesn't write somebody a ticket and gives them a warning. So all I'm saying is we don't want this in Raytown, and we are going to try to keep people from doing it, because I believe it is cruel, I believe it is counterproductive, and I believe it is unnecessary, to be honest with you. People, if somebody wants to take their dog out to go to the bathroom, fine, take them out on a leash. Get one that's got an extension that lets them run 30 feet to go do it. You know, that's not a difficult solution.
Well, certainly, the leash is one solution to that, I guess. And actually, someone could stand at their door with a leash and have the dog on the leash and not necessarily be outside with the animal and would still be in compliance with the law.
That's a good point.
I just want to make sure that whatever we do, that it is enforceable, and that Mr. Hadarpour, that you and your staff can enforce it, and that if it does come to court, Mr. Nigro, that you would be able to enforce it in court, and that if there is a citation for that there could be a penalty. And Otherwise, you know, we're just spitting in the wind if we can't get both of those things done.
I don't see a problem once it's brought to court. I mean, I understand the issues that Mr. Hagerford may have with, you know, observating and writing the charges, but if you write an ordinance that says no tethering, then it's no tethering. That's and if or but. So we can enforce that, yes.
Mr. Hadirpour or Mr. Nigro, or maybe Jennifer, do any of you, or maybe Missy, are you aware of what other cities do and what they have relative to this, to tethering? Other cities around us, and have they been able to enforce it?
The city of Lee Summit has an animal cannot be tethered for more than 30 minutes at a time and no more than 3 hours in a day. The animal must remain supervised while on a tether. You must provide shelter and water for the animal while it's on a tether. My understanding is, I think the city of Kansas City, Missouri has even stricter provisions than that. I don't know it verbatim. I did research the Lee Summit one. I do not have with me Grandview's, but I do know that they have something similar on Timeline for tethering. I don't know if Mr. Nigro has any comments, and I also was given a copy of St. Joe's, and St. Joe basically sets the hours in which you cannot tether. You cannot tether from the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. This was sent to us by someone that was commenting on Facebook about the animal at Woodson, you know, what other communities are doing. It cannot be the primary restraint, and if you're tethering during the approved hours, then no more than 30 minutes unless the animal is provided adequate food, water, and shelter, and is suitable for the species, the animal, and the condition of the weather. To address Alderman Emerson's concerns, there are certain animals, outdoor is their nature, they like to be outdoors, so this is how St. Joe tried to address that. And that would be the condition with the one at Woodson, is that Woodson has provided, he has shelter, he has hay, food, and water, even though he's being tethered.
Mr. Ward?
Well, I just want to, so it sounds like we're already the strictest city around, and apparently we're still not satisfied with our ordinance. So I guess I'm trying to figure out what we're going to do tonight that's going to make it better. I mean, so.
Mr. Asian?
And that's how I started. I said, you know, I think you only have two choices: either you are or you aren't going to do it. You know, and it was, and just for a point of humor, Alderman Emerson was talking about, you know, you want a watchdog, and so when I was knocking on doors, I saw they had like a little deck on the front door. It's a pretty good sized deck, but not very big, really not very big, but for a deck. And there was a sign that said "Beware the dog," and I couldn't see the dog, so I thought, well, the dog's not out, you know. And I can outrun a dog even at the age of 65 because I still had both my good knees, and I was pretty fast at that age. When I got on top of that deck and I saw the dog, and the dog saw me, and it was a long rope. Yeah. And I was pretty fast, but he caught me right at the end of the rope, and it did draw blood, you know. So a good watchdog, you know, right? You want to keep your house protected. You put a watchdog out, you let him bite the people that go to the door. I'm not sure that's what we want in Raytown either, but that's a good example of how you use a watchdog, you know, and they work. We could talk the thing to death. You know, I mean, we could give a lot of examples about why you do want to do it, why you don't. You know, generally, if you have an outdoor dog, I would think you would provide for the dog outdoors and not just keep them at the end of a chain all day. It would be a run or have a fenced-in yard, you know. And I have a question too, Missy. In Lee Summit, my daughter all my kids but one, and we have 6 kids live in Lee Summit, so they don't have a leash law, do they? I was told there's no leash law in Lee Summit. Is that true?
I don't know about the leash law. I just Googled the word tether in their municipal codes, and this is the section that came up to speak specifically to tethering.
Yeah,
So I'd
I
have to
say that
research
because I questioned her. She has a door, and her dog, and they have 2 dogs, 3 dogs, 2 of them are pit bulls, and they go in and out of the house all day long, and they're never leashed. They go all over the neighborhoods in Lee Summit. So when I questioned her, she said, yeah, we don't have a leash law in Lee Summit. So, but that's another good example.
Perfect.
You know, if that's true, you don't have a leash law, but you want to tether a dog, you have to question why you wouldn't want to do that. When you have pets, there's a lot to the picture, you know, and that's why it's so difficult for the codes department and even for this board to make a decision. But did you not have calls regarding the dog in question? You did have calls, didn't you?
Sure, several calls.
Right,
yes.
and there are several calls.
Yes.
And there were people who saw the dog that were very concerned about it.
Yes.
So someone's crazy here, either the owner or all the people that are making the calls. But there's something wrong going on here, or you would have never got the calls.
Again, we received several calls in that particular incident. And several of those calls, we confirmed the dog was not outside, even though we did get the call that the dog's outside. One morning, I came to work, I got an email, the dog is outside. I dispatched the code officer to the location. She went by, the dog was not outside. So again, we get conflicting complaints about that particular incident, but we have a log of several different days, different time of days, different temperature that we responded to that location.
And I got to think that probably most of the codes, not most of them, but a lot of the codes we have deal with kinds of things like this that are a matter of opinion, or whether or not you should or should not allow a dog to be tethered. A lot of people see it as cruel. I think it's cruel, but that's just my opinion. It doesn't make me right.
There's a lot of language, it's vague, and you use code enforcement or even building official, they use their discretion. But in this situation, it's a dog tethered outside all day, then we definitely talk to the homeowner. We leave him a note if they are not home. Then we send a letter out to notify him as far as the tethering clause. Now, like I said, if this goes through and then no tethering is allowed, then we'll enforce that. And don't get me wrong, we will enforce that to the best I can. But what I'm saying is we will have some challenges that I don't want to be in a false ground here that this is going to fix the problem, period.
Right. And I'll just throw one more example out. When we had the smoke-free environment, that debate, a lot of people on both sides that had different opinions, you know. We're always going to be in that situation when we're coming up with codes. We have to make a decision as a city and stand by it. And I think we should have continuity, you know. That's all. I just want smart laws.
And I agree. I don't think we should allow our dogs to smoke either. But
Alderman Azier, to answer your question, Lee Summit's city website says that animals at large, while outside, all dogs and cats must be contained at all times by either fence, leash, or tether.
Thank you. I'll inform my daughter that.
oh, they're already after right now. They probably heard you. Well, we have a motion, and the motion is to outlaw tethering. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And we have a second to that motion. Now, if we pass that, then this would go on back as a recommendation for an amendment to the full board. And at that point in time, it could be amended as well. So just so everyone's aware of how that process will work. So what decision we make tonight is not going to change the ordinance. It's just a recommendation to the full board. And which, if we make that recommendation, then we will need to also determine when we want that to come to the full board for our recommendation for the change to the ordinance. So we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any other discussion? Okay, could you call the roll, please?
Alderman Walters?
Yes.
Alderman Azier?
Yes.
Alderman Emerson?
No.
Alderman Bill Van Buskert?
I'll pass.
And Alderman Ward?
No.
Alderman Van Buskert?
No.
Okay. Fails 3-2.
No, not necessarily. If someone would like to make another motion, then they certainly can do that.
Okay, I'll make the motion that we recommend to the board as a whole, the words that are written in the document in front of you in the agenda.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Ms. Wilson?
Alderman Walters?
Yes.
Alderman Azier?
Yes.
Alderman Emerson?
No.
Alderman Ward?
No.
And Alderman Van Buskert?
Yes.
Okay. 3-2, it passed. Okay.
Well, I make a recommendation that we bring this to the Board of Aldermen at our next regular city council meeting, which will be, what date is that?
17th.
17th of December.
You need a motion?
Yes.
Okay, so moved.
Okay, Mr. Ward seconded that. Any discussion? Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Alderman Walters?
Yes.
Alderman Ward?
Yes.
Alderman Azier?
Yes.
Alderman Emerson?
No.
And Alderman Bill Van Buskert?
Yes.
Okay.
Got a motion.
Okay. You have a motion?
Get us out of here. Okay.
I think he wants to make a motion that we adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
Everyone in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all.
Thank you, Bill.